there's this stereotype that women are hysterical and emotional, and the data indicates, and every interview I did showed that in moments of crisis, women are calm and they look at the data and they don't make decisions with their emotional connections to money or time they may have invested leading up to the moment. They see how the situation has changed and they use the data to try to see around corners. But this idea that women are making decisions driven by emotion is just not true.
When I started inspiring women, I had one clear mission to advance the next generation of women leaders. This show is for you. Whether you're climbing the corporate ladder, building your own business, or navigating the complex world of healthcare leadership. That's why I'm asking you to please take a few minutes and fill out our quick 5 question survey. Your feedback will help shape the future of this show, what topics we cover, which guests we feature, and how we can best support your leadership goals. Visit inspiringwomen.show/survey to share your thoughts. That's inspiringwomen.show/survey. Your voice matters, and I can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to today's conversation. This is Inspiring Women, and I'm Laurie McGraw, and today I'm speaking with Julia Boorstin, and she is so many things. She is a journalist, she is a creator, she is a tech AI expert. I want to talk about that. She is an author, she is a mom, she is a creator of things like the Changemakers list, and she is an incredible advocate for trying to close the gender equity gap. Julia, thank you for being on Inspiring Women.
It's really an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, let's dive in. I want to start first and just ask, how does a history major turn into an Emmy-nominated journalist, turn into somebody who is expert in technology? And then I want to talk about all the work that you do to help promote and lift up women.
Well, that's a funny question because I feel like I've always been doing the same thing. I graduated from college 25 years ago. And ever since then, I've just been reporting on business, but on these crucial business moments that showcase what's happening in society. And I think business journalism is such a fantastic way to actually dive in to the culture, to the social change. And it's just been in a phenomenal way for me to be reporting on what's happening in the world. And actually, I feel like being a history major, writing history papers, that was all about studying moments of change in the past. And now I'm just studying moments of change in the present and the future. So I feel like I've just been writing papers my whole life, and I clearly love it. Interviewing people, doing research, and writing papers. And I've been at CNBC for 19 years. It's been a very long time. Before that, I was at Fortune magazine for 6 years. And at CNBC, reporting on media and technology and these sectors that have seen so much transformation. It's been a real gift to have this insight into the ecosystem that is the fabric of our lives and also undergoing such massive change and with really incredible leadership too.
And you're so excellent at, I've seen you taking technology leaders to task and really questioning, not questioning them, but really probing into, how their technologies or innovations are doing good for the world and not going in the wrong direction. You have an incredible knack to understand the depth and breadth and opportunity with AI. I've appreciated that. I've seen it up close and personal, Julia. So let's go into your focus on women. In all of the work that you've done, you have interviewed thousands of women executives, and you've put particular attention and spotlight on that from your book, When Women Lead, to the Changemakers list. Let's start with When Women Lead. First of all, tell us a little bit about the book.
So the book came out in 2022. I wrote it over the course of the pandemic. And this book highlights the stories. I feature about 60 women in the book, and it highlights the stories of several dozen women who have defied the odds. As you well know, women are underrepresented in leadership. About 10% of CEOs of the Fortune 500 are women. When it comes to venture capital funding going to women, just about 2% of all venture capital dollars go to female founded companies. A bigger percent goes to co ed founded teams, but the vast majority of venture capital dollars go to male only founded teams. So the women I profile have defied the odds. As a student of technology and as a journalist, I was struck by the fact that there was this real disconnect between these female leaders who I had the opportunity to interview, who are doing incredible things and seem to have a very different approach both to business and also to their own leadership. There's a disconnect between that and those statistics I just referenced. The fact that
Yep.
these female leaders were drawing such a small percent of the overall dollars. So, what I wanted to do was to highlight all that data to lay out in front of the readers the arguments for why that data didn't make sense and those gender gaps didn't make sense, and to showcase these women who have defied the odds. And the thing about my book is I think it's valuable for men to read as well as women, because I think it's important to study extraordinary leadership. And you know, that America is a culture that celebrates people who have done things that seem impossible, and I would say all of the women in my book have achieved the seemingly impossible.
Well, and with some of the patterns that you saw with those 60 exceptional women, what were there some things that were just counterintuitive to what you might expect? I mean, I've read hundreds of leadership books. I obviously put nothing but leaders on inspiring women like yourself, Julia. So, what were the things that just surprised you in these interviews as a student, as somebody who's always writing papers? What were some of those surprises?
When I started off doing this book, at first I thought I just wanted to highlight these extraordinary women and I wanted to tell their stories. But I also realized it would be more valuable if I could identify the key skills and strategies that they were deploying. And I could tie that to the academic research, back to the fact that I'm still just feel like a student, tied back to the academic research that explains why their skills and strategies were so effective. It's not so helpful just to say this one person succeeded by doing this one thing. It's more valuable to say, here's why leaders who demonstrate vulnerability in general are successful in general. And here's why female leaders are more likely to lead with vulnerability. That's just one of those things I found. But I think the overarching thing I found is that I did not find one single playbook for how female leaders succeeded. I actually thought I would interview a couple dozen female leaders and there would be some clear things that each one of these women did, and that women managed to defy the odds by following this set of skills and strategies. That was not what I found. I was shocked to discover how incredibly different these female leaders were from each other. And there were some common themes throughout and some things that women are more likely to do. But the one unifying thing is that these women who defied the odds led by being true to themselves, really, really understanding their strengths, their unique strengths, and having that honesty with themselves about that, so they could then be more successful and draw people who complemented them. So I think it was really that self-knowledge and figuring out how to work with their strengths and weaknesses. In all of that, and the fact that there isn't one single set of characteristics for a successful female leader, there are things that women leaders tend to do that would actually be effective for anyone to do
Any
in
leader.
leadership. And I mentioned vulnerability, and that's when you hear a lot about. But I think that especially now, when there's so much uncertainty in the world, so much uncertainty in the economy, vulnerability is really about transparency, right? Not performing strength, but being transparent about what you know and what you don't know. That's something that's effective, not just for employees, but also for partners. Another one is empathy. Maybe not surprising. Women rate higher on empathy tests. I loved learning that you could test your empathy skills. And empathy really just comes down to the ability to understand, put yourself in someone else's shoes, to understand what they might be feeling or thinking. That's not a soft skill. I hate the term soft skills.
Yeah.
And I don't use it at all in my book. The ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes is essential when you're negotiating. It's essential when you're trying to figure out how to motivate or drive your team. These are strategic skills. Another one that was really surprising for me is gratitude. Women in general are more likely to practice gratitude. Again, back to the academic research. Women are more likely to practice gratitude. And gratitude is an essential skill for leadership because it correlates with long term decision making. Gratitude and patience go hand in hand. If you're feeling okay in the moment, if you could remind yourself why you feel grateful in the moment, you're more likely to be able to make a plan for the future rather than go for the short term win. And of course, we know that long term planning.
How do you tie this to authentic leadership? I feel like, authenticity is one of those terms that was used and was, everyone was talking about authenticity during the pandemic. It's somewhat going out of vogue now, but yeah, some of what you're talking about, I do think is that authentic self showing up as that as a superpower, if you will, for these women leaders.
Yeah. And I think, look, all of these things are about understanding who you are and not trying to fit into a box. And I have talked to so many female leaders who said that in the early part of their career, they wanted to be treated just like the men. So they dressed just like the men. They acted
Mhm.
just like the men. They thought they had to lead just like the men. And and that's not who they are. And so I think a lot of these women discovered, you know what? I'm not going to wear the boxy suit. I myself wore glasses I didn't really need. I think my prescription was negative 0.5%. Like I did not need these glasses, but I thought they would make me be taken more seriously and I would sort of blend in my ugly blue suit. And I think that these women realized that once they were liberated from these constraints of trying to be something they weren't, they could actually focus on who they were and getting the work done. I've talked to a number of female CEOs who tell me they're introverts, and I'm like, well, we have this image of a CEO as being this gregarious, outgoing type, and that they have to be a sort of a very formal leader of men, and this sort of this performative nature of expectations of leadership. And the reality is that not all great leaders are going to fit that mold. And the ones that are able to take a step back and say, hey, I'm going to structure meetings in such a way that even the quietest voice can be heard. That's not just going to be good for me. That's going to be good for all the other people like me who maybe are not going to be out there and just steamroll the conversation because I'm loud and I can be pushy with my words. So I think it's really about understanding who you are, why you're doing what you're doing. I think purpose is another thing that female leaders are far more likely to have, and they're all female leaders are more likely to have purpose-driven companies that have an additional purpose beyond just generating profits. If you understand your purpose, you
Yeah.
are going to be able to push through when the times are tough, which is going to be true for anyone. But you want to make sure you really understand who you are and why you're doing what you're doing.
Julia, I want to actually talk about some of those tough times because another theme that you highlighted, in terms of what is important for the most exceptional leaders are when they face serious obstacles. And, I like to talk about, sort of like leaning into the hard and leaning into the, really, really difficult, meaty issues because I find that women leaders who are exceptional, they can sort of see a lot of different sides of an issue. They can bring in other voices. They don't necessarily feel that their voice is the only one that needs to be listened to. So, can you talk a little bit about what you discovered and learned in terms of those obstacles and how that shaped the exceptional leaders that you talked to?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a huge gift to me to be able to report this book during the pandemic. And I remember starting working on the book and then the pandemic started to hit and I was on my way to an interview with a CEO to talk to her about the book when we got those alerts on our phone saying there are these stay-at-home orders. And I was like, oh God, can I even write this book anymore? And then I realized, no, it's more important for me to write this book because business leaders are going to be facing the biggest challenge since the Great Depression or since World War II. This is going to be the biggest challenge business leaders have faced. And how these female leaders who have already defied the odds manage these challenges is going to be important to watch. And those who succeed are worthy of being studied and emulated. You mentioned this idea of communal leadership. And this idea that
Hmm.
women are more likely to go and draw on the perspectives of the people who work for them before they make a decision and execute. And this is something that is statistically women are more likely to do. Also, statistically, people who lead that way are more likely to be successful. And there's a reason I have 40 pages of endnotes in my book because I really wanted to reference all this data. Um, this idea that you can turn down your confidence, that you're not supposed to be confident all the time. You could turn down your confidence in order to be open to new ideas, to really listen to the people on the ground who are interfacing in that moment with what's most urgent and essential, something that you might not understand in a corner office in some skyscraper somewhere. That's incredibly valuable. And I think that's where humility comes in. And this
Yep.
idea that you don't have all the answers, you should make sure you realize you don't have all the answers when you're gathering information And then once you've come to your own decisions, you've come to the conclusions, that's when you should turn up your confidence to execute and to explain your strategy with confidence. So I think this is something that women leaders are more likely to do. And reporting on the pandemic, I think about Karen Seidman Becker, who runs a company Clear, which is the biometrics company that's all about getting you through airports faster. All the travel in the world came to a screeching halt. So she had to figure out how to manage the company to keep it afloat and also prepare the company for the future. And I think she's a fantastic case study in how to be adaptable in crisis and to be driven by data and not emotion. And I think one thing that really surprised me, one idea about women leaders that my research and reporting totally disproved, is this idea that women are emotional in their decision making. And sure, people are emotional, but there's this stereotype that women are hysterical and emotional. And the data indicates, and every interview I did showed that in moments of crisis, women are calm and they look at the data and they don't make decisions with their emotional connections to money or time they may have invested leading up to the moment. They see how the situation has changed and they use the data to try to see around corners. But this idea that women are making decisions driven by emotion is just not true.
Which is also not to say that there isn't emotion. I mean, showing up
Sure.
with emotion in
Yeah.
the moment,
Yeah.
being angry about the situation, but then being able to make decisions off of the important information and not let, even if you brought
Yeah.
emotion to a certain situation, that's such an
And
important point.
emotion is normal. Yeah, and emotion and vulnerable. You could be vulnerable about emotion. You could talk about how uncertain the times are. I don't know a woman who hasn't cried at work. I've certainly cried
Yep.
at work, and I won't tell you how many times I've certainly cried at work. But I also think that but I think there's that idea that you can be emotional, and then you can also, in a moment of crisis, make decisions that are not driven by emotion.
Right. Right. Well, let's talk about some of those examples because you've created the CNBC Changemakers list. So first of all, tell us a bit about this list. And I was just looking at some of the names that you had on this list, from 2025. You've got Toyin Ajayi, from City Block Health. You've got Nancy Brown from the American Heart Association, Kim Keck, Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation, Paris Hilton. I mean, this is an exceptional list of power players that are out there. So, first of all, what is this list? How do you select the people who are on it?
So I love the process of working on my book. I thought it was really important to surface the stories of these 60 women I talk about in the book. But the book came out in 2022, and I wanted to continue highlighting the stories of exceptional women. And I think it's important for everyone to know their stories and also to see these alternate models of leadership. There isn't just one model of
Right.
hierarchical, top down, more typically male leadership. So I went to my bosses at CNBC to figure out how we could bring my book to life in a living, breathing way for television. And so, what we developed with our amazing team at CNBC is this list of change makers. The list comes out once a year. We've had two lists come out. The list is unranked. And since there are other women's lists out there, we want to make sure ours is really different. And what it's focused on is change, women who are driving change in business or philanthropy. And it's based on their accomplishments in the past year. So you can have an extraordinary CEO who's doing a great job. But we're not as interested in the power of it all. We're interested in what they accomplished in the past year. And that yields an incredibly diverse and dynamic list, a mix of people who you've heard of, maybe like Alex Cooper or Taylor Swift, these big celebrities on one hand, Paris Hilton, and on the other hand, people who you may not have heard about, but you will be so grateful when you hear their stories because they are so inspiring and they are doing so much, not just to change their own businesses, but the world around them. And actually, Toyin Ajayi is one of the few women who I wrote about in my book. I have a whole chapter that's pretty much about her. And then also she was named to the list because of how much she's driven change in the healthcare industry. So we are accepting nominations for our next CNBC Changemakers list. You could go to cnbc.com/changemakers to submit a nomination. So anyone can be nominated, but we are focused on women who have businesses of a certain size. If you go to the website, you'll see, or nonprofit organizations of a certain size, you'll see the types or the sort of the bar that we're looking for to make sure it makes sense for you to nominate. But it's an incredible group of women. And now we have this community. We have a summit every year in April. We did one in New York and one in LA. And we're also launching a podcast featuring stories with
Yes.
these change makers and other power players. And for me, doing these interviews, I love hearing about how these women have succeeded. And part of it is my own curiosity. You mentioned I have kids. I'm ambitious. I have this great job that I love. And I want to figure out how I can unlock my own potential and really tap into my own power the way these women have. So, as you'll see in the podcast, a lot of it is my own curiosity about how they do it and how they make it all work and what drives them and motivates them and how they've overcome those challenges because everyone's going to face challenges. So it's been an exciting journey bringing this franchise into the world, and it's growing and expanding, and we're really thrilled about it.
Julia, give us an example of something that you've learned. I mean, you are an exceptional powerhouse. I mean, that's why you're on Inspiring Women, why I'm so happy to be talking to you. So some things that you've learned that you said like, oh, wow, that's actually something that is new and I can actually take it and bring it into my own work.
Oh, there are so many things. I guess I'll go first to Whitney Wolf Herd because she's our first podcast that we're launching with. And she talks about the importance of listening to her own intuition. And she's running a big public company. You don't hear a lot about intuition of CEOs of public companies, but there was something about understanding how the balance of data and instinct is something that you have to hold on to no matter how big your company gets. And I think about that a lot. We all get, I have kids and we talk about the spidey sense, like what's your spidey sense telling you? And I think the idea that she's able to see into the future and figure out what trends are going to be big and when it comes to online dating or the way AI is impacting things because she's really listening to her intuition and her intuition has been right before. That was something I've been thinking a lot about her interview. And then you mentioned Toyin Ajayi, the CEO of City Block Health. There's something she said, which I wrote about in my book, and I think about I all the time, almost every day. She founded this incredible company that here in the US is trying to address healthcare by addressing the underlying conditions of people in under-resourced communities. So in the poorest populations, if people are getting treated in a hospital and then getting discharged into the street, they're not going to be able to get healthier. They're not going to be able to follow the medical recommendations their doctor gave them. If they're homeless, you need to address their basic needs.
Right.
And she came up with this idea because she had been a doctor in Sierra Leone. She was trying to build a pediatric or rebuild a pediatric hospital and make it more effective. And there was no running water. And she realized she couldn't do the things she was brought there to do, which was improve the pediatric care if there was no running water. And so what she saw in that is you kind of need to take a step back and say, in order for me to do the thing I'm supposed to do, what is the underlying issue that needs to be addressed? And so in Sierra Leone, it was getting a plumber there to fix the broken pipes. That has
Okay.
nothing to do with being a doctor, but it was essential for her to do the work. In the medical system, she needs to get people access to housing and food before she could treat them medically. And for me, the question of what's the water supply problem is when you're dealing with a challenge, whether it's a cranky kid or a conflict at work, what is the underlying issue? I don't want to just put a band-aid on the problem because you could keep putting band-aids on problems forever. But what is the underlying, what I call the water supply issue that really needs to be fixed? And I guess what's so inspiring to me about so many of these women is they're not just trying to put a band-aid on the problem. They're looking at their industry, at their sector, and they're saying, how can I change the way I do this? So we're not just in this cycle of band-aids.
Well, maybe just to dig into that a little bit more, Julia. I mean, you do so much work to lift the voices of other women beyond just the work that you do in CNBC and journalism. Clearly, you're passionate about it. There are a lot of headwinds for women right now. We have more women who are dropping out of leadership and top spots than ever before. There are reasons to believe that we've got a very leaky middle right now. So we have less mentors, less sponsors that are out there. Yet you're enthusiasm sounds very optimistic about the future for women, for closing some of this gender equity gap that's out there. So, what is that problem that you see? Do you have optimism in terms of the future? What do you think about that for younger generations?
You are absolutely right about all the data. I mentioned some of the numbers at the beginning. The numbers are not good and they are getting worse. And it is a problem if you have senior women leaving the workforce because that has negative implications for all the young people they're not mentoring and also role models for. I think having senior women leave the workforce is bad for young men. You want the 25-year-old guy to look up and say, I want to lead like her. I want to succeed by taking the same approach as this woman has succeeded with. So I think having women leave the workforce is really going to have negative implications. Having said that, I am optimistic in part because the data shows that female leaders are more effective.
Hmm.
And there are various indexes that are tracking this. Female led companies tend to outperform, female led startups tend to outperform. They yield returns to their investors a year earlier on average. They tend to be more profitable. The data does not lie. And I think over time, the more this data gets continued to be collected, the more people are going to start to see it. There are a couple of men who said to me, gee, I read your book and it really seems like there's an arbitrage opportunity here. And I kind of laughed because I was like, yeah, I think there is an arbitrage opportunity here. I'm also optimistic because I've interviewed so many amazing women. I feel so privileged to get to meet these women who are so inspiring and what they are doing is incredible. And I think the more people can learn about these women, the more they will see their strengths in themselves. They'll be able to connect their abilities and their own skills and strategies to how these women lead, and they'll feel empowered and inspired as well. I also think there are more networks. There are podcasts like yours. There are podcasts like mine. There are communities of women who are figuring out how to help each other in ways that didn't exist a decade ago. And I think part of that is because of logistics. But I think culturally there's been a shift in that we understand there isn't just room for one woman at the table, that there are going to be 3 or 4 women at a table of 10 or 12 men. And those women are going to help each other because they know they'll be more successful if those other women are there. And that is a dramatic cultural shift. That wasn't the case not so long ago. So I am optimistic. And I think we have to be optimistic in order to drive change.
Well, I have to say, I just, first of all, I could not agree with you more. And I just love the way that you frame that. And, I find the conversation, Julia, just inspiring. And I just also, you gave us so much information, not just like what you've studied and all these other women that you talked to, but yourself, how you have dug into this in addition to all that you do. So I just want to close out is this inspiring women conversation. And Julia, thank you so much. I've so appreciated this. I will look forward to your Changemakers podcast. Thank you for being on Inspiring Women.
Thank you so much, Lori. It's really a thrill to be here. And I'm such a fan of all that you do.
If you enjoy the show, please leave a 5-star review.